Alicia Carter stepped into the boutique with a mix of excitement and pride. At 16, she was finally getting the chance to shop on her own without the guiding presence of her father, James Carter, a well-known entrepreneur in the city. The boutique, nestled in a luxurious corner of Beverly Hills, was renowned for its exquisite designer collections. Alicia had long admired its elegant displays and the way each piece seemed crafted for moments of grandeur. Today, she was here to find the perfect dress for her father's upcoming charity gala, a night where she wanted to look her absolute best. As Alicia browsed the racks, her youthful energy and confidence radiated through the store. She touched the fabrics carefully, her eyes lighting up at the intricate designs. This was a moment of independence she had been waiting for, a chance to express her style and make a choice entirely her own. But not everyone in the boutique shared her enthusiasm. From across the room, Margaret Whitfield, a regular customer known for her condescending demeanor, watched Alicia closely. Margaret's sharp, calculating gaze narrowed as she took in the sight of the young girl. To her, Alicia didn't belong in a place like this. Her assumptions were based solely on prejudice, and Margaret was determined to make her disapproval known. Margaret began muttering under her breath, loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "They're really letting just anyone in these days," she whispered with a disdainful smirk. Though Alicia was too engrossed in her search to notice the remarks, other customers glanced at Margaret uneasily, sensing the brewing tension. Margaret continued to follow Alicia with her eyes, her judgment growing harsher with every move the girl made. When Alicia reached for a beautiful dress on display, a flowing emerald green gown perfect for the gala, Margaret's quiet remarks turned into pointed stares. To her, Alicia's presence was a disruption, an intrusion into a space Margaret believed should only cater to people like herself. Unaware of the hostility building around her, Alicia held the dress up to the light, her face glowing with anticipation. She hadn't yet noticed that her simple act of shopping had drawn unwarranted scrutiny, setting the stage for an encounter that would challenge her composure and Margaret's entitlement.
Before we dive into today's story, we'd love your support. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Your engagement helps us create more inspiring stories just for you. Now, without further ado, let's get started.
Alicia Carter moved gracefully through the boutique, her fingers brushing against racks of luxurious dresses. She felt a sense of pride being here on her own, stepping into a space she had admired from afar for so long. The boutique's polished marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, while the carefully curated displays of designer pieces made every corner feel like a work of art. For Alicia, this moment wasn't just about finding the perfect dress, it was about embracing her independence. Her eyes lit up when she spotted a stunning sapphire blue gown hanging delicately near the front. The dress shimmered subtly under the boutique's lights, its intricate beadwork catching her attention. Alicia smiled as she approached it, imagining how it would look at her father's charity gala, a night that meant so much to him and in turn to her. But as Alicia reached for the dress, a low, muttered comment broke through the quiet hum of the boutique. "She probably can't afford that," Margaret Whitfield said under her breath, her tone dripping with condescension. The words weren't meant for Alicia to hear, but were loud enough to draw glances from nearby customers. Alicia remained blissfully unaware, too absorbed in admiring the gown's delicate details. However, Margaret's disapproving gaze never wavered. She stood a few feet away, her lips pressed tightly together, as if restraining herself from saying more. To Margaret, Alicia didn't belong here. Her youth, her presence, everything about her felt out of place in this refined setting. Margaret whispered again, her voice sharper this time. "What is she even doing here?" Her words reached the ears of a few other shoppers, who exchanged uncomfortable glances, but remained silent. The atmosphere in the boutique grew tense, yet Alicia, with her heart full of excitement, remained unaware of the storm quietly brewing. As Alicia continued browsing, the boutique's tranquil ambience began to shift. Margaret Whitfield, standing near a display of handbags, couldn't contain her disdain any longer. Her sharp eyes followed Alicia's every movement, and her muttered remarks grew louder, aimed to provoke attention. "I can't believe they're letting just anyone shop here now," Margaret said, her voice carrying across the boutique. A few customers glanced her way, their faces showing discomfort, but no one intervening. This place used to have standards. Alicia, still engrossed in her search, felt a faint prickling at the back of her neck. She paused briefly, glancing around the boutique, catching sight of Margaret's piercing gaze. For a moment, Alicia considered whether she was imagining the tension, but the unmistakable sneer on Margaret's face left no doubt. It wasn't the first time Alicia had encountered such hostility, but it didn't sting any less. Determined not to let Margaret's judgment ruin her day, Alicia took a deep breath and turned her attention back to the racks of dresses. She found another elegant piece, a soft blush-pink gown with intricate lace detailing, and held it up, admiring the way it caught the light. But Margaret wasn't done. "You'd think they'd enforce stricter policies about who they let in," Margaret said loudly, her words punctuated by a dismissive chuckle. Alicia heard the comment this time. She glanced in Margaret's direction, her face calm, but her posture straightening slightly. "Excuse me," Alicia said, her tone polite but firm. Margaret met her gaze with feigned innocence, shrugging as if her comments were harmless. The room felt heavier now, the tension growing with every word Margaret uttered. Alicia refused to let the hostility shake her, focusing instead on her purpose, finding the perfect dress. The boutique's quiet elegance shattered as Margaret Whitfield raised her voice, drawing the attention of everyone in the store. "Excuse me," she called out, pointing directly at Alicia. "I've been watching her, and I'm certain she's slipped something into her bag." Alicia froze, her heart pounding at the sudden accusation. The dress she had been holding fell limply to her side as she turned to face Margaret, her calm demeanor masking the humiliation rising inside her. The other customers stopped what they were doing, their eyes darting between Margaret and Alicia. The air felt heavy with unease. "I beg your pardon?" Alicia said, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "I haven't done anything wrong." Margaret crossed her arms, her expression a mix of triumph and disdain. "People like you always say that," she replied, her words dripping with implication. "If you have nothing to hide, then show us your bag." The store manager, a young woman who had only recently started working at the boutique, approached hesitantly. She glanced nervously between Margaret, a known regular, and Alicia, unsure of how to handle the situation. "What seems to be the issue, Mrs. Whitfield?" she asked cautiously. "The issue," Margaret snapped, "is that this girl is acting suspiciously. I'm telling you, she's taken something, and you need to check her bag immediately." Alicia's cheeks burned, not from guilt, but from the sheer indignity of the moment. Despite the humiliation, she maintained her composure. "I haven't stolen anything," she said firmly. "But if it'll put an end to this nonsense, go ahead and check my bag." The manager hesitated before reaching for Alicia's bag. Alicia handed it over without hesitation, her jaw tight as she tried to ignore the murmurs of the small crowd that had formed. The manager opened the bag carefully, her hands trembling slightly. After a thorough inspection, she looked up and shook her head. "There's nothing here," the manager said quietly, her tone apologetic. Margaret's face twisted in frustration. "Check again," she demanded. "She must have hidden it somewhere else." Alicia stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting. "I think we're done here," she said, reclaiming her bag. "Unless you have actual proof, I suggest you stop harassing me." The room fell silent, the tension thick as the other customers watched. their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Margaret, however, was far from finished. The store manager stood awkwardly, her gaze shifting uneasily between Margaret and Alicia. The weight of the accusation hung heavily in the air, and her uncertainty was plain to see. She cleared her throat nervously. "Mrs. Whitfield," she began, her voice soft. "I've already checked her bag, and there's nothing there." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, her annoyance growing. "That doesn't mean she didn't take something," she snapped, her voice rising. "People like her are good at hiding things. I'm just trying to protect the store's reputation." The manager hesitated, torn between the entitlement of a regular customer and the glaring injustice of the situation. "Perhaps we should all calm down," she said weakly, her words doing little to diffuse the tension. Alicia, standing tall despite the humiliation she felt, locked eyes with the manager. "You've already checked my bag," she said firmly, "and I haven't done anything wrong, so why are you still letting this happen?" The manager shifted uncomfortably, her lack of confidence showing. I just think it would be best if we avoided further disruptions," she said, her words directed more at Alicia than at Margaret. Alicia's stomach sank at the implication. It wasn't the first time she had faced this kind of treatment, but it didn't make the sting of it any less painful. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "You're asking me to leave?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with disbelief. "I think it's for the best," the manager replied hesitantly, unable to meet Alicia's gaze. Margaret folded her arms triumphantly, her smirk growing as the manager's indecision effectively sided with her. The murmurs of the other customers grew louder, some shaking their heads in disapproval but staying silent. Alicia glanced around the room, noting the judgmental stares and whispered words. Her heart ached, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "If this is how you handle situations like this," she said calmly, "I have no choice but to call someone who will." She dialed quickly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Dad," she said, her words cutting through the tension. "I need you to come to the boutique. There's a situation here." Margaret rolled her eyes, but Alicia stood firm, knowing help was on the way. Margaret Whitfield was far from satisfied. She stood rigid, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze fixed on Alicia with a mixture of disdain and determination. "Calling someone to bail you out, are you?" Margaret sneered, her voice sharp enough to cut through the uneasy silence of the boutique. "Typical. That's what people like you always do." Alicia didn't flinch. She met Margaret's glare head-on, her calm composure a stark contrast to the other woman's growing fury. "I've done nothing wrong," Alicia said, her voice steady. "I don't need to explain myself to you." Margaret let out a huff of frustration, her cheeks flushing with indignation. "Oh, you're a clever one, aren't you?" she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Acting all innocent and respectable, you're trying to manipulate everyone here into thinking you belong." The tension in the room grew thicker, the quiet hum of whispered conversations filling the air as customers exchanged glances. Some seemed uncomfortable with Margaret's behavior, while others simply watched the scene unfold, unsure whether to intervene. Alicia inhaled deeply, grounding herself. "The only person doing any manipulating here is you," she said evenly. "You've made baseless accusations and stirred up chaos, all because of your own assumptions. It says a lot more about you than it does about me." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You're just trying to turn this around on me," she snapped, her voice rising. "But you can't talk your way out of this. I know what I saw." "You saw what you wanted to see," Alicia countered, her tone firm but controlled. "And no amount of shouting is going to change the fact that you're wrong." The store manager fidgeted nearby, clearly overwhelmed, but still did nothing to take control of the situation. The other customers watched, their curiosity tinged with discomfort. Alicia, however, stood her ground, refusing to let Margaret's words unravel her. The boutique's tension was nearly palpable when the soft roar of an approaching car engine pierced through the awkward silence. Heads turned toward the boutique's glass doors as a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Margaret's condescending smirk faltered for the first time, while Alicia's quiet strength remained unwavering. Help had arrived. The soft chime of the boutique's glass doors opening shifted the room's energy in an instant. All eyes turned toward the entrance as James Carter stepped inside, flanked by a bodyguard whose sharp gaze swept the store like a hawk. James's tailored suit and confident stride exuded authority, his every step clicking against the polished floor with purpose. Alicia's composure softened slightly at the sight of her father, but she remained standing tall, silently communicating her strength. Margaret, on the other hand, froze, her smug expression faltering as she took in James's commanding presence. James paused near the center of the room, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. He took in the uneasy manager, the hushed customers, and finally Alicia standing amidst it all. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with unmistakable authority. Margaret, regaining her nerve, stepped forward. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she began, her tone shifting to one of feigned politeness. "I'm so glad you're here. This girl," she said, pointing at Alicia, "has been causing trouble. She's suspicious, and I'm certain she tried to take something from the store." James raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Suspicious?" he echoed, his gaze shifting to the store manager. "Is there any proof of this?" The manager fidgeted nervously. "Well, we checked her bag, and there was nothing there," she stammered. "But Mrs. Whitfield insisted—" "Insisted on what?" James interrupted, his voice steady but sharp. "Harassing a customer without evidence? Humiliating my daughter in front of everyone here?" His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Margaret's face drained of colour. "Daughter?" she stammered, her confident demeanour crumbling. "I didn't know she was—" "She shouldn't have to be my daughter to be treated with respect," James said firmly. "Every customer in this store deserves fairness and dignity, regardless of who they are." He turned back to Margaret, his gaze piercing. "What you've done here isn't just wrong, it's disgraceful. Your assumptions, your accusations, they're all based on nothing but prejudice." The room fell silent, the weight of James's words sinking into every corner. Margaret looked around, searching for support, but found none. The balance of power in the boutique had shifted entirely, leaving her exposed and defenseless. James Carter stood tall, his gaze fixed on Margaret Whitfield. The boutique was silent, every eye on him as his words cut through the tension. "Your actions today have not only disrespected my daughter, but have also revealed the ugliness of prejudice that has no place here or anywhere." Margaret's face flushed deep red as she stumbled for a response. I didn't mean any harm," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I was only trying to protect the store." James's eyes narrowed, his tone growing colder. "Protect it from what, exactly? A young woman shopping for a dress? Or is it that you've decided, based on nothing but your own biases, who belongs here and who doesn't?" He paused, letting his words sink in. "Your behavior is unacceptable. You are no longer welcome in any store I own." Margaret's jaw dropped. "You can't do that," she exclaimed, but her words lacked conviction. The room's silence weighed on her as the customers and staff exchanged knowing glances, their disapproval of her actions clear. "I just did," James replied, his voice firm and unwavering. "My stores are places where everyone, regardless of who they are, is treated with dignity and respect. You've shown you're incapable of that." He turned to the store manager, who stood nervously clutching a clipboard. "And you," James said, his tone measured but sharp, "you allowed this to happen. You failed to act when you should have stood up for what was right. That reflects poorly not just on you, but on this entire establishment." "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," the manager murmured, her head bowed. "I'll make sure this never happens again." James nodded but didn't let her off easily. "It had better not," he said. "This store represents my name, and I won't tolerate this kind of behavior." Finally, he turned to Alicia, his expression softening as he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Alicia smiled, her strength shining through despite the ordeal. "I'm fine, Dad. Thank you." "I'm proud of you," James said. "You handled yourself with grace and dignity, even when you were treated unfairly. Remember, this store and the world belongs to you as much as it does to anyone else." Together, they walked toward the boutique's exit, leaving behind a room filled with humbled onlookers and a powerful lesson on the importance of respect and equality. Alicia's story reminds us that prejudice and assumptions, when left unchecked, can cause harm far beyond what we might realize. Margaret Whitfield's behavior was a reflection of deep-seated bias, a mindset that has no place in a society striving for fairness and equality. Yet, even in the face of humiliation and injustice, Alicia stood her ground, displaying remarkable composure and resilience. Her dignity and strength served as a powerful reminder that no one's worth is determined by the narrow judgments of others. James Carter's intervention highlighted the importance of using one's position and voice to stand against prejudice and uphold justice. His decisive actions not only defended his daughter, but also set a clear standard for how every individual deserves to be treated, with respect, regardless of background, status, or appearance. This story challenges us all to examine our own behavior and assumptions. How often do we judge others based on appearances or preconceived notions? And how often do we stand up for what's right when we witness injustice? Let Alicia's strength inspire you to be courageous in the face of adversity, and let James's actions remind you to champion fairness and dignity for all. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that inspire change.